Friends, thank you for being here today. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the biting, unforgiving cold of the Canadian Northwest Territories. Imagine the sound of heavy machinery humming against the backdrop of a vast, frozen wilderness, a mechanical heartbeat that has pulsed steadily alongside the Mackenzie River for over a century. This is Norman Wells. For more than 100 years, this wasn't just an oil field. It was a monument to Canadian resilience. It was the bedrock of a community. It was a place where generations of families built their lives, their identities, and their futures around the promise of pulling energy from the earth. But today, we are not here to talk about a triumph of industry. We are here to investigate a sudden, chilling silence. We are here to look at a corporate press release that dropped like a localized earthquake, erasing a century of history seemingly overnight. After more than 100 years of continuous operation, surviving world wars, global recessions, booms, and busts, Imperial Oil has abruptly announced it is pulling the plug on the Norman Wells oil field. Sometime in the third quarter of 2026, the pumps will stop. The heartbeat will flatline. And the shockwaves of this decision are currently tearing through the Canadian energy sector, ripping through the lives of thousands of workers and shaking the very foundations of Ottawa. Now, if we strip away the PR jargon and look at the brutal, unvarnished math of this decision, a very different picture emerges. To the workers on the ground, Norman Wells is everything. But to the executives sitting in pristine, climate-controlled boardrooms thousands of miles away, Norman Wells produces about 6,500 barrels of oil a day. To you and me, that sounds like a massive amount of energy. But Imperial Oil's total production hovers around 400,000 barrels a day. When you do the math, Norman Wells represents barely 1.5% of the company's total output. 100 years of Canadian blood, sweat, loyalty, and environmental compromise, all reduced to a rounding error on a corporate spreadsheet. It is a stark, devastating example of how quickly human legacy can lose to corporate efficiency. But we have to look wider, because this story isn't just about one isolated town in the frozen north. The brushstrokes of this corporate retreat are much, much broader. Imperial Oil isn't just abandoning Norman Wells. They have announced they are slashing a staggering 20% of their total workforce by 2027. We are talking about nearly 1,000 high-paying, highly skilled jobs evaporating into thin air. Furthermore, they are abandoning their massive, multi-building Quarry Park headquarters in Calgary, a city that has been the undisputed beating heart of Canada's energy sector for decades. They are selling off the real estate, moving a fraction of the workforce north to Edmonton, and, inevitably, bleeding technical and engineering expertise out of the country entirely. Officially, the company calls this portfolio optimization and asset rationalization. These are cold, calculated, sanitized phrases designed to calm shareholders and satisfy financial analysts. But in the cutthroat, multi-trillion-dollar world of global energy, timing is absolutely everything. And that timing leads us to the central question of today's investigation, the very hook that has independent analysts and geopolitical observers staying up late into the night. We have to ask ourselves, is this massive, sudden contraction simply a corporation tightening its belt in a shifting economic landscape? Or are we witnessing the opening move in a calculated geopolitical strike against Canada's sovereignty? Are we watching a simple business decision, or are we watching the deployment of the Exxon Ultimatum? Pause for effect. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Down in the comments right now, tell me your gut reaction. Do you buy the official story that this is just standard corporate restructuring, or do you sense there is a much bigger geopolitical game being played here? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one, and we're going to dive into some of those theories right now. To understand the whispers currently echoing through the halls of power in Ottawa, we first have to acknowledge the official narrative and look at the undeniable, on-the-record facts. Imperial Oil has valid logical arguments for this shutdown. The infrastructure in Norman Wells is ancient. Specifically, a crucial piece of infrastructure known as Line 490, a massive flow line essential to the operation, desperately needed replacing. In the extreme conditions of the Northwest Territories, replacing a pipeline isn't just difficult, it requires astronomical capital expenditure. Every piece of steel, every hour of labor costs exponentially more in the north. Analysts have pointed out that even if they spent the hundreds of millions required to fix the infrastructure, the overall economics of this aging field wouldn't drastically improve. The oil is getting harder to extract, the maintenance is getting more expensive, and the profit margins are shrinking. From a strictly operational standpoint, Imperial Oil's desire to consolidate operations around their more profitable modern assets in Edmonton makes logical business sense. If you just read the official press releases, the math adds up and the story ends there. It's just a sad day for a northern town, but a predictable outcome of free market capitalism. But, and this is a massive but, if you step away from the corporate PR wires, if you look at the geopolitical forums, the encrypted chats of political strategists, and the independent energy think tanks, a very different, highly unverified, yet deeply compelling theory is spreading like wildfire. This is the point where we must transition from the stated facts into the realm of geopolitical hypothesis. What I am about to share with you are not confirmed corporate strategies, but rather a chilling scenario being modeled by those who study the weaponization of global capital. To truly grasp this theory, you have to remember who pulls the strings. Imperial Oil is a Canadian company in name, but it is majority owned and ultimately controlled by ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is not just a company, it is a global leviathan based in Houston, Texas. Its revenue rivals the GDP of entire nations. It operates with a level of geopolitical influence that most sovereign governments can only dream of. The theory, often referred to in these circles as the squeeze, suggests that the shutdown of Norman Wells and the gutting of the Calgary headquarters is not just about 6,500 underperforming barrels. According to speculative analyses currently circulating in elite policy circles, this could be a highly coordinated intentional pressure campaign. The hypothesis goes like this: by abruptly shutting down historic, highly symbolic sites and publicly slashing thousands of jobs, the ultimate goal might be to create artificial economic panic within Canada. You might ask why a corporation would want to panic a country it operates in. The answer is simple: to force its hand, to alter its laws, to break its political will. And that orchestrated panic points directly to the political reality on the ground in Canada, and the primary target standing in the crosshairs of this economic fallout, Prime Minister Mark Carney. The optics of this closure could not possibly be worse for the current administration. A historic Canadian town faces economic annihilation, and thousands of jobs in Alberta are wiped out. The opposition is already sharpening its knives, taking to the airwaves and social media to directly blame the progressive environmental policies of the federal government. They point directly to legislation like Bill C-69, often dubbed the No More Pipelines Bill, and the Broader Impact Assessment Act as the exact reasons why capital is fleeing Canada. Now, let's inject the American political climate into this volatile mix. We have to look at the America First agenda, a legacy of the Trump era that has deeply infected the boardrooms of massive American corporations, particularly in the fossil fuel sector. Some progressive political strategists are asking a very dangerous, very uncomfortable question. This is a circulating theory that we must examine with critical eyes. Is ExxonMobil deliberately weaponizing its Canadian assets to align with a new, ultra-aggressive America First fossil fuel agenda? Let's unpack how this supposed strategy would actually play out. The theory posits that massive U.S. corporations, deeply aligned with conservative anti-regulation ideologies, are intentionally trying to starve progressive governments of economic wins. By creating localized economic disasters, like gutting a town in the Northwest Territories or emptying an office park in Calgary, they create an environment of fear. In this state of fear, the public begins to turn against environmental protections. The narrative quickly becomes, green policies kill jobs, and environmentalism destroys communities. Under this immense manufactured pressure, nations like Canada are forced into a corner. To save the jobs and appease the anger, governments are pressured to deregulate, to gut their own environmental protections, to slash corporate taxes, and essentially hand over the keys to their natural resources to foreign entities with zero conditions. It's an alleged strategy of punishment designed to make Canada pay for daring to try and build a sustainable, environmentally conscious future. It is a message sent from Houston to Ottawa. Play by our rules. Let us extract without consequence, or we will take our capital and leave your people freezing in the dark. This brings us to a massive debate, and I really want your take on this. Do you believe multinational corporations like ExxonMobil actively use job cuts to politically blackmail progressive governments? Or is that giving them too much credit? Let's get a debate going down in the comments section. Is the squeeze real, or just a conspiracy theory? Of course, the corporate defenders and allied politicians are quick to offer a silver lining. They want you to look away from the job losses and focus on the cleanup phase instead. When the news of the Norman Wells shutdown broke, the narrative almost immediately shifted to something that sounds wonderfully hopeful on paper: reclamation. Imperial Oil, the federal government, and local politicians have been touting a multi-million-dollar and potentially up to a $1 billion cleanup project to restore the site. It's being presented as a massive economic wave, a lifeline for the community full of jobs and contracts. It sounds almost poetic. The industry finally cleaning up after itself and providing decades of employment to heal the land they spent a century exploiting. But let me tell you why that narrative is nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. A cleanup job is not an industry. It is an exit strategy. It is, by its very definition, finite. When you are producing oil, you are creating new wealth, generating royalties, and participating in an ongoing global market. When you are cleaning up a toxic site, you are simply paying the tab for past profits. Let's look at the harsh geopolitical and economic reality of how these mega reclamation projects actually work. Do you honestly think the $1 billion is going to flow directly into the pockets of the local businesses in Norman Wells? History tells us a very different story. Cleaning up a century-old oil operation in a fragile subarctic ecosystem is not simple. It requires highly specialized engineering, massive environmental consulting firms, and advanced technological logistics. Who gets those contracts? Usually, massive multinational engineering firms. The specialized workforce flies in, does the work, and flies out. The capital does not stay in the community. It goes to corporate headquarters in Toronto, New York, or back to Texas. Meanwhile, what is happening to the permanent high-level knowledge economy? The engineers, the geologists, the technical managers who were based in Calgary, they are being laid off. Their jobs are not being replaced by reclamation workers. The high-level intellectual capital of the Canadian energy sector is being transferred down to Houston or eliminated entirely. If the theories we discussed earlier hold true, the billion-dollar reclamation figure is nothing but a PR smokescreen. The corporate giant extracted unimaginable wealth from Canadian soil for a century. Now, as the well runs dry and the infrastructure crumbles, they are leaving a toxic legacy behind it. They throw $1 billion at a cleanup operation to satisfy regulators and save face in the media, while quietly, efficiently moving the real capital, the real power, and the engineering future out of the country. It is the ultimate magic trick. They make you look at the shiny billion-dollar cleanup so you don't notice that your economic sovereignty has just been smuggled out the back door. To truly understand the gravity of what progressive economic models are currently projecting, we need to introduce a concept that is rarely discussed on the evening news. We need to talk about what happens when the invisible hand of the free market clenches into a fist. Economists call it a capital strike. A capital strike is not a labor dispute where workers walk off the job. It is vastly more powerful and vastly more quiet. A capital strike occurs when those who control the massive flow of international investment funds simply refuse to deploy their money. They do not stop investing because they lack the funds or because there is no profit to be made. They stop investing specifically to starve a government into submission. It is the geopolitical equivalent of a siege. According to these theoretical frameworks, what we are witnessing with ExxonMobil's Canadian subsidiary is not a retreat driven strictly by bottom-line necessity, but a highly weaponized, deliberate capital strike. The message is not written in a memo, but it is spelled out clearly in the sudden evaporation of 1,000 jobs. The message is this: we will not allow our capital to build your progressive vision. We will not fund your transition. If your democratically elected government insists on environmental assessments, indigenous consultations, and carbon accountability, we will simply take our billions and leave you holding an empty bag. Let's pull back the curtain and look at the broader global chessboard for a moment. If ExxonMobil is pulling capital out of the Canadian North and downsizing its brain trust in Calgary, where exactly is that money going? They certainly aren't transitioning into solar panels and wind turbines. No, they are retreating to what geopolitical strategists call fortress zones. Look at where the real massive investments are flowing right now. They are doubling, even tripling down on the Permian Basin in Texas, and they are pouring billions into massive offshore projects in places like Guyana. Why? Because in those environments, the regulatory friction is practically non-existent compared to Canada. In places heavily aligned with the deregulatory, drill-at-all-costs ideology of the America First movement, environmental oversight is viewed as a hurdle to be lobbied away, not a standard to be met. By pulling out of Canada, these supermajors are creating a global contrast. They want to show the world the perceived cost of progressive leadership. They want to make an example out of Mark Carney's Ottawa. The underlying strategy, again, a deeply unsettling hypothesis circulating in policy circles, is to visually and economically demonstrate that nations demanding strict environmental compliance will suffer brutal economic consequences, while nations that strip away regulations will be rewarded with billions in investment and thousands of jobs. It is a psychological operation played out on a macroeconomic scale. But the real tragedy of this capital strike isn't just about the oil that won't be pumped. It is about something much harder to replace. Let's return to the closure of the massive Quarry Park complex in Calgary. When a corporation of this magnitude decides to pack up its headquarters, what exactly are they taking with them? It is far more insidious than just empty office space. When Imperial Oil moves its technical operations and downsizes its engineering staff, Canada is falling victim to a catastrophic brain drain. In the modern energy sector, oil is just the physical commodity. The real value is the data, the algorithms, the intellectual property, and the highly specialized human capital. For decades, Canadian universities and Canadian public resources helped train some of the finest petroleum engineers, geophysicists, and environmental scientists on the planet. They worked in Calgary, developing cutting-edge technologies to extract energy more efficiently and with less environmental impact. They mapped the Canadian subsurface in excruciating detail, When those jobs are slashed, or when those specific high-level functions are consolidated and quietly transferred to the parent company's hub in Houston, Texas, Canada loses more than income tax revenue. It loses its sovereign intellectual property, the patents, the proprietary seismic models, the deep institutional knowledge of Canada's own geology. That data doesn't stay in Alberta. It gets absorbed into an American corporate mainframe. This is what modern colonial extraction looks like. It's not just about taking the physical resources out of the ground. It's about extracting the intellectual capability to manage those resources independently. By dismantling the technical brain trust in Calgary, the corporation ensures that Canada becomes increasingly dependent on foreign expertise to manage its own sovereign land. They are effectively blinding Canada's future energy independence, ensuring that the next time a well needs to be drilled or a massive environmental cleanup needs to be engineered, Ottawa and Edmonton will have no choice but to hire an American firm to do the thinking for them. Speaking directly to the camera. By the way, if you're watching this from Calgary or anywhere in Alberta, I need you to sound off right now. Are you seeing this brain drain happen in real time? What is the mood on the ground among the engineers and the workers? Let your voices be heard in the comments below, because the mainstream media is missing this part of the story. So, what happens next in the quiet, carpeted hallways of Ottawa? Do you think the lobbyists working for the energy sector are packing their bags and going home just because Imperial closed a field? Absolutely not. According to political insiders, this is when the shadow lobbying goes into hyperdrive. This is the exact moment the Exxon Ultimatum is delivered behind closed doors. You can almost script the meetings taking place right now between industry representatives and panicked politicians. The lobbyists walk into the Prime Minister's office. They point to the devastated economy of Norman Wells. They point to the massive commercial real estate crash looming in Calgary due to the empty Quarry Park campus, and they deliver the threat with a sympathetic smile. They say, "Prime Minister, it is a shame what is happening to these communities. It's a tragedy about those 1,000 jobs. But, you see, global capital is fleeing. Our hands are tied by the harsh realities of the market." Now, if you were to perhaps reconsider the scope of Bill C-69, if you were to offer aggressive, sweeping corporate tax incentives, if you were to quietly bypass a few environmental review boards, well, maybe we could convince our board of directors in Texas to pause the next wave of layoffs. It is corporate extortion, wrapped in the polite language of economic advisory. They create the crisis, and then they offer to stop inflicting the pain, but only if the democratically elected government surrenders its legislative authority. This tactic preys on the short-term survival instincts of politicians. The threat of a recession, the fear of losing an election because of soaring unemployment, these are powerful levers that can crack even the most steadfast progressive agenda. And if this hypothesis is correct, it exposes a terrifying existential structural weakness in the Canadian economy. It proves that a country's sovereignty is an illusion if its primary economic pillars are controlled by entities whose ultimate allegiances lie with foreign political movements and global profit margins. It is the classic analogy of the boiling frog. For decades, Canada enjoyed the warm, comforting water of foreign investment. The money flowed, the cities grew, and the consequences seemed far away. But now the temperature is being turned up aggressively. The capital strike is the heat. The layoffs are the boiling bubbles. The corporate giant is demonstrating that it can turn off the prosperity tap at will, leaving the country economically paralyzed. The question is no longer whether the water is boiling. The question is whether Canada is finally going to realize it needs to jump out of the pot, which leads us to the ultimate question we have to answer today. Where does all of this leave us? Are we watching a checkmate on the geopolitical chessboard, or are we witnessing the painful birth of a Canadian awakening? We must bring this narrative back to the Canadian people. If a historic field with over 100 years of legacy can be shut down without a second thought because it no longer fits a foreign giant's efficiency model, what else is vulnerable? If thousands of jobs in Calgary can be erased to satisfy a boardroom in Texas, how much control does Canada actually have over its own destiny? It is time to reframe this crisis and shift the perspective from one of victimhood to one of profound radical empowerment. Yes, the layoffs in Alberta are absolutely devastating. The human toll is real, and it is heartbreaking. Yes, the impending silence of the machinery in Norman Wells feels like a heavy, mournful loss of identity for a community that proudly fueled a nation. But what if we look at this through a different lens? Let's consider a final hypothesis, one championed by progressive economic theorists who are looking past the immediate pain. Perhaps this isn't the death of Canadian energy. Perhaps, just perhaps, the Exxon exit is a painful, brutal, but absolutely necessary wake-up call. For decades, Canada's energy policy has been deeply, perhaps inextricably tied to an old American-dominated oil hegemony. Canada has often acted not as an equal partner, but as a resource-rich vassal state, bending its environmental laws and economic policies to appease foreign capital. What if this withdrawal is the forced severance we never had the political courage to initiate ourselves? This is the ultimate test. The shutdown of Norman Wells and the gutting of the Calgary offices is not just about losing an oil well. It is a fundamental test of the Canadian spirit and political resolve. Will Canada panic? Will Ottawa bow to the pressure, surrender its environmental sovereignty, gut its regulations, and beg the foreign corporate giants to come back on their own exploitative terms? Will Canada allow a Trump-aligned corporate ideology to dictate its national policy through economic blackmail? Or will Canada use this deeply painful moment to finally stand up? Will it look at the empty office buildings in Calgary and the quiet fields in the north not as a defeat, but as a blank canvas? Will this be the moment Canada stops outsourcing its energy destiny to Houston boardrooms and starts building a sustainable, sovereign energy future that serves Canadians first? The oil may be running dry in Norman Wells, but the true reserve of Canadian resilience has yet to be tapped. The ultimatum has been delivered. So, what is the next move? Does Canada fold, or does Canada stand up? I want to see your strategies in the comments section. If you were the Prime Minister sitting in Ottawa right now, how would you respond to the Exxon Ultimatum? Let me know down below. If you appreciate deep dive investigations that look past the PR spin, hit that like button, share this video, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next chapter. Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant, ask the hard questions, and never accept the official narrative at face value. I'll see you in the next one.